Hello guys, welcome back to our anime moments. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Throne of Steel episode number 163 based on novel. So let's start. In this oppressive atmosphere, which would possibly degenerate at any time, a clear voice suddenly reverberated from all directions of the room. What use is there to vote? The reason why you are opposed to supporting the Night Temple is only that they are not strong enough in your eyes. Then, let's decide on this decision based on strength as well. Whoever is the strongest should get to decide. These sounds were heard clearly by everyone present while the temperature in the whole room plummeted. There wasn't any murderous spirit, but an indescribable killing intent burst out in all directions. Although at least a half of the powerhouses present here reached the 9th step, in front of such a terrifying killing intent, everyone felt as if they had been wrapped around ice. Even Shing Yu and Shing Yu were shocked. This sudden surge of killing intent was just too terrible. The Assassin Temple was expert in slaughter, but right now, they had great feelings of shock when getting wrapped up in this killing intent. Just who was it that came? Of so many powerhouses there, none had even taken notice. And furthermore, this killing intent was clearly at the level of a domain. The powerhouses of the 9th step in the Assassin Temple were close to 20, but of the ones really wielding a domain, including Shing Yu and Shing, there were only a total of 4. Exactly because they had domains of their own, their comprehension of domains was far deeper as well, enabling them to clearly identify this cold surge of killing intent as coming out from a domain of an even higher grade than theirs. That incorporeal pressure left them full of shock. A black figure appeared noiselessly in the midst of the conference room, standing at the highest point of this 7 meters tall room. Clad in a long black skirt, she had long, deep purple hair draping all over her back and down to her feet. As her hair fluttered lightly, the cold killing intent kept coming out from her body. A huge sickle was held in her right hand, dispersing deep blue and purple lusters. Although she was just floating at this spot, she felt like the center of the world. Everyone felt as if the terrifying killing intent coming out from her body was entirely aimed at themselves, and no one dared act blindly, not even Shing, because none of them felt confident in taking a full-powered blow from her. Her face was of absolute beauty, but her eyes were deep and fathomless. Some white halations kept coming out from her body at low intensity, but giving off an incomparable feeling of nobility. An even more intense white halation came out from the midst of her chest, giving off a pure and holy presence. Seeing her appear, Shing Yu suddenly felt his eyes becoming really hazy in tears. He unconsciously loosened the tight grip on his chest, his body starting to shake uncontrollably. She was back, finally back. Kia! Hearing Shing Yu's resounding call, the higher-ups of the Assassin Temple became full of shock. Almost all of them knew that Shing Yu had a great-granddaughter who had carried on the dagger of samsara, but the ones who had seen Kia for real were really few. All they knew was that Kia had disappeared over 4 years ago. At that very moment, Kia's appearance in front of them gave off a great feeling of shock. Could it be that she really managed to gain control over the might of the dagger of samsara? But just how old was she? Just in her 20s. Kia's deep look was directed at Shing as she declared indifferently, before deciding by vote, I challenge Elder Shui in my capacity as the Saint Daughter of Samsara of the Assassin Temple. If I win, I will take over your status as Elder Chief of the Assassin Temple. And if you win... At that point, she paused and suddenly showed a smile, a devastatingly beautiful smile that made everyone present sluggish. You won't be able to win, so no need to consider this eventuality. I am bringing everyone somewhere else, which should make it easier for Elder Shui to show the best of his capability. At this point, she waved the sickle of the god of death, from which a translucent white ray came out and turned into a barrier, wrapping around everyone present. From there, a white brilliance came to view, causing their surroundings to look blurry. A spatial transportation which could actually transport such a large group of people. In a large flash of light, all the higher-ups from the Assassin Temple appeared in a building dispersing a white halation. The surroundings gave off an illusory feeling, and soft fluctuations of spiritual energy circulated all around her. Those pure fluctuations with no elemental attribute were faint in intensity, but gave off a great feeling of might. The higher-ups from the Assassin Temple were all shocked. Kia's sudden return was originally a great shock, but her display was beyond their knowledge. They did not know what she did to cause such a miraculous scene. This was clearly not inside Shingmodalu, but what was this place? Could Kia's cultivation already be at the level to open up a whole new space? Shing's complexion became extremely unsightly. His sight was firmly fixed onto the sickle of the god of death in Kia's hand. Out of everyone present, only he knew that the white rays dispersed from her weapon was light of purification, giving off pure palpitations. Shing knew about Shing Yu's great-granddaughter being the saint daughter of Samsara with extraordinary gifts, her innate internal spiritual energy surpassing 90. But from his view, even if Kia was still an important figure, she was in the end really young, to say nothing about how she was already missing for so long. Never did he expect Kia to appear at such a time, and moreover, from Shing Yu's expression, he could tell that even he didn't expect Kia to come out at such a time. Kia's look swept through each of the assassins present. Strength shall account for everything. I challenge every one of you, whoever accepts my challenge will have to give me his or her right to vote upon defeat. If you don't accept my challenge, I take it that you renounce on this right to vote. Shui Shengji let out a cold snort. In what way are you qualified to do that, little girl? Kia let out an indifferent smile. I am part of the Assassin Temple, and strength is what qualifies me. Based on the rules of the Assassin Temple, reaching the 9th step of cultivation should make one an elder of the temple. Hence I am already part of the elders group. Moreover, none of this matters to me. This is my world, so without my permission, none of you may come out. Whoever does not accept my rules may remain here forever. Yu Shuijisheng agitatedly reacted in anger. Although Kia was displaying a very relaxed smile, a tyrannical speech enraged these old assassins. A little girl of 20 or so actually dared speak to them in such a manner. Shing Yu, is this how you trained your great-granddaughter? Shui Shengji shifted his focus on Shing Yu. Shing Yu was no longer as perturbed as he had been long ago, and showed an indifferent smile in response. Kia is my great-granddaughter, but she's also the treasure of our assassin temple. All of you should have heard that Kia had already started integrating the spiritual stove of Samsara at the age of 3, gaining the approval of the dagger of Samsara. You should all know how much pain and torment Kia had to experience to fuse with the spiritual stove of Samsara. Her 6 senses were lost in succession, and she was left in a cold cave by herself at the age of 3 years old for a very long time. All of this was to make her stronger for the sake of our assassin temple. Maybe she's still young, but from how I see it, she sacrificed absolutely no less than anyone else present here for the sake of the assassin temple. Since she is finally back after over 4 years, now should be the time for me to resign from my leading post. Our next decisions to make are no longer only about our position in the temple's great gathering, but also, I have a proposal to let Cai take over my duty to hold office as head of the assassin temple. Oh, there's also something else that I forgot to announce to you all. As early as 5 years ago, Cai already underwent her formal awakening as the saint daughter of Samsara, making her the one chosen by the god of death. I believe that her capabilities as a god's chosen one should have already grown tremendously. Now should be the time to unify the assassin temple. Shing Yu's words gave off earth-shattering feelings to the whole audience. The one chosen by the god of death taking over the assassin temple? This was a far more important matter for the assassin temple. Seeing the sickle of the god of death in Kia's hand, the looks in the eyes of some of them relaxed gradually. Perhaps the supporters of Shuijisheng were more numerous, but their standpoint was all in consideration for the assassin temple. As early as 10 years ago, Shing Yu had mentioned that, at the time Kia gained true control over the dagger of Samsara and reached the 9th step of cultivation, she would get a unanimous support from their temple. The former scion of Samsara used to raise the assassin temple to the top of the alliance, so why would the new saint daughter of Samsara not be able to do the same? Now that Kia was back, a cultivation having visibly also broken through the 9th step, as well as having a domain of her own, and furthermore, having the miraculous ability of spatial shifting, everyone here knew who would be the most fitted to lead the assassin temple. Most importantly, Kia was a little over 20 years old. The meaning of a powerhouse of the 9th step, an inheritor of the dagger of Samsara at this age, was clear in all their eyes. Even if Kia had just risen to the 9th step, what if she would be given 10 years? Everyone knew about Li Xingji's strength, but his innate internal spiritual energy was only at 80. Being just a wind user at this level of cultivation, what would come out 10 years later for Kia? At that time, would the assassin temple even need to attach themselves to someone else? It would rather be the others who would come cling to them. Thinking of all this, the standpoints of the higher-ups present distinctly changed. Being the chief elder of the assassin temple, how could the experienced Shuijisheng not be able to tell out the changes on the others? Just as Kia had said, strength was the greatest factor of authority. Moreover, she wielded the symbolic saint dagger of Samsara, giving her an extreme importance inside the assassin temple. Adding Shing Yu's support of her to that, if this went on, his control over the elders would surely suffer a huge blow. The reason why Shuijisheng had such backing in the assassin temple naturally had its basis, stemming first of all from the consideration behind his decision for the assassin temple. At the same time, he had his own selfish motives. The head of the Mage Temple Li Jingji had given him the promise that if he managed to get the Assassin Temple to remain neutral, after the new alliance gets established, he'd be given a high position in this new alliance. Don't think that because of his old age, his thirst for authority would have lightened. Perhaps he was even more thirsty for the unobtainable. Right now, it looked that Shing Yu and Kia were about to regain control of the situation, so he naturally wouldn't leave the matter at that. Snorting coldly, he suddenly let a huge blast of imposing mana burst out from him, catching the attention of everyone present here. Very well. Then let this man try out, to see whether you are qualified to undertake the heavy responsibilities of the Saint Daughter of Samsara. If you win, I will unconditionally support all your future decisions, as well as be in favor of you replacing Shing Yu. But if you lose, stay secluded in our temple for a few more years, and you can take duty in some high position after you gain sufficient strength. No matter what one may say, Shui Shengxi was a higher-up from the Assassin Temple. After a short time of fury, he gained some knowledge of Kia from Shing Yu's explanation. Of course, he understood that Kia's presence would very possibly make a new glorious future arise for the Assassin Temple, so, right now, his speech was a lot lighter. Of course, he did not believe that the current Kia had enough capability. After all, she was still so young. His current hope was to gain control over the current Assassin Temple and gain a better standing in the new alliance. As for the future, it should be left to the youngsters of Kia's generation. That is why Jisheng decided to accept Kia's challenge and prove himself with strength, in order to maintain his support among these fickle assassins. Shing Yu did not even take Shui Jisheng in his eye, a light smile coming into view on his severe face. That's because he knew that at the time Kia brought the Assassin Temple's higher-ups there, Shui Jisheng had already lost. He didn't lose in cultivation, but in age and future. Even if he didn't take part anymore, Kia's supporters would only keep growing more and more. As for this battle, no matter whether it ends as a win or a loss, Kia had already made a real impact on the people, making her control over the Assassin Temple only a matter of time. Shui Jisheng's figure sparkled slightly, then his figure disappeared, and the next instant he appeared at a distance of 20 meters from Kia. His awe-inspiring look was directed at her like a viper eyeing its prey, his hands placed behind his back and showing an unwavering face. Make your move then. As a powerhouse of higher generation, Shui Jisheng was 4 generations ahead of Kia, so attacking the first was not something he could do. Kia responded with a light smile, then you better take care. The sickle of the goddess of light lightly paused on the ground, and the pure white light of purification spread to all directions, giving off a feeling of electricity hovering through the whole sky. Kia's sickle of the goddess of light struck under these circumstances. Right at the same time as Kia made her move, Shui Jisheng's body disappeared, leaving only light silver remnants behind. That was the highest powerhouse of the Assassin Temple, an assassin wielding space attribute, not someone who speaks casually, but one with real great strength. When Kia's blow landed and gave off the feeling that she was in a disadvantageous position, a miraculous change took place. The sickle of the god of death rapidly traced a shifting arc, and at the same time, Kia's whole body turned into a white color, and the sickle of the god of death had a huge blade extension attached. First of the 7 arts of the god of death, death in childhood. _Dan. A figure was pushed away in midair. At the same time that huge white blade swept past the empty space, Shui Jisheng fortunately appeared at its weakest spot. Having just crossed space through instant shift to face such a terrible blow, Shui Jisheng was really pressured greatly, as one may well imagine. The killing intent originally swarming out from Kia seemed to have disappeared, but the immense sickle of the god of death in her hand felt about to slice Shui Jisheng. A pair of silvery white daggers with an orange tint came to block off that white glow, as he took on a soul shock, dispersing rapidly his spatial spiritual energy, as his spiritual highland unexpectedly got dispersed upon contact with that white blade. Attribute suppression. That was the absolute suppression of the purification attribute in front of spatial attribute. Shui Jisheng clearly felt that Kia's spiritual energy was below his to some extent, but under the attack of that huge white blade, he saw with shock the bluish and purplish sickle follow him tightly while being sent flying, striking his pair of daggers fiercely. Relying on his pair of daggers of epic tier, Shui Shiqing could parry the attack of the light of purification, but the instant they clashed against the opponent's weapon, Shui Shiqing felt his body shiver like he'd been electrocuted, finding out with shock that cracks were appearing lightning fast on his daggers. Although this attack was not enough to destroy the daggers of epic tier, what about the next one? His figure flashing past, Shui Shiqing disappeared once again, but Kia didn't pursue the attack, standing calmly on the same spot. A drizzling fog spread outwards, growing alongside lotus flowers' petals. In the midst of these petals, she simply looked like a fairy. Everywhere those petals passed, a thin white fog was produced in the air, not dense enough to obstruct the field of vision, and not even acting on the senses, but this white fog gave off a feeling of terror hard to describe. The petals stopped after spreading out to a diameter of 30 meters, and didn't envelop the rest of the assassins. A domain. That was clearly a domain. The 20 or so years old Kia actually really managed to wield a domain of her own, and that was a domain with uses that no one was able to recognize. Domains were of different types, with no completely identical ones. Common knowledge would generally want assassin domains to be expert in single-targeted attacks, as assassins would usually be the strongest on a small scale. Kia's domain was also of rather small scale among assassins' domains. But the smaller the scale, the greater the burst power coming along. The unknown was the most terrifying. Precisely because no one understood the effects of Kia's domain, it gave off a feeling of reverence. Both Kia's currently displayed domain and the attack that sent off Shui Shiqing were sufficient for her to prove her own strength to the higher-ups from the Assassin Temple more than enough. No matter how this fight would end, her backers would in no way be few. Shing Yu's smile became even more accentuated. After being away for over 4 years, not only did Kia's strength grow to a shocking level, but even her temperament made enormous progress. She did not simply fight to win against Shui Shiqing, but most all to make a show for further the higher-ups assassins' approval of her. Right at this time, 12 brilliant silver gates appeared suddenly in the domain surrounding Kia, including even herself inside. This 12 spaces domain was the domain of the Assassin Temple's elders Chief Shui Shiqing, another domain fitting individual battles the most, a powerful domain of spatial attribute. While raised up, these 12 silver-colored spatial gates immediately blocked off the view of the other assassins. By chance, this place was tall enough for them to liberate spiritual wings of their own, rising high in the battlefield. Facing the 12 spaces domain, Kia was still standing quietly in the middle and making no movements. These petals kept spreading outwards and releasing a white halo, as she seemed to be just calmly waiting. Suddenly, a silver ray instantly burst forth from the spatial gate, traveling too fast to be followed with one's eyes. As it flashed, the opposite silver-colored gate of light disappeared at once. The 12 spaces domain's greatest trait was its encirclement. Someone who gets caught inside this domain couldn't possibly escape without beating or getting beaten by Shui Shiqing. It was called 12 spaces domain because of the 12 superposition spatial gates giving rise to this domain. 12 spaces overlapping each other should in normal times not be achievable by any means, but this domain's spatial effects made this possible. In there, escaping through spatial abilities or even passing through space would not be possible either. It looked that these spaces had no floor, but actually, Kia was absolutely incapable of flight at the very moment. At the same time, Shui Shiqing's attacks would be greatly amplified by the effects of the domain's overlaps. Their speed as well as destructive power would reach terrifying levels. 10 years ago, Shui Shiqing relied on the 12 spaces domain to vanquish a demon god ranked in the top 40, giving a great boost to his reputation as well as making him known as the #1 of the Assassin Temple. Right now, Kia and her domain with ineffable effects were all surrounded by the 12 spaces domain, giving rise to a far from good situation. When the silver rays flashed, Kia still stood there unharmed, but the far-sighted people could all see that when the silver ray launched its attack, Kia's body suddenly had an illusory look. All these rays pierced through her body, but when they disappeared, she came back to normal. That was obviously an extraordinary dodging technique. Shui Shiqing's 12 spaces domain's amplification may actually rank his speed at the #1 in the alliance, but Kia still managed to evade him through her dodging techniques. Who wouldn't be shocked by such a feat? Suddenly, the sickle of the god of death suddenly slashed out in a direction, before coming back to normal, the 12 spaces domain remaining the same. No one could tell what she was doing. The only shocked one was the involved elder Shui Shiqing. Kia's previous empty slash nearly caused him to splurt out blood because her weapon slashed at his second attack's trajectory. With his previous lesson, he now really didn't dare clash against the sickle of the god of death, for fear of getting his pair of epic tear daggers destroyed. So at the time Kia moved her sickle of the god of death, he suddenly shifted trajectory unconsciously and interrupted his own attacking motion. In fact, the 12 spaces domain may give a great amplification to his attacking power, but his body would also be subjected to a great pressure. Suddenly stopping his course of attack immediately inflicted on him a severe backlash, and this oldest elder from the Assassin Temple was far from young anymore. In their clashes, Caia had launched only one direct attack, but its whole process shocked Shui Shiqing greatly. To say nothing about the degree of power of her attack or the tyrannical strength of the sickle of the god of death, The fact that Kia managed to accurately predict his location went beyond this old man's understanding. Shui Jisheng may not be the greatest powerhouse in the Alliance, but he was certain to be the greatest cultivator of the spatial attribute in the Alliance. He found no explanation as for how Kia managed to predict his own position. This should be impossible from his point of view, and immediately caused a loss of advantage on his side. Also, after launching his first attack through his domain, he came to realize the fearfulness of Kia's domain. That peaceful-looking lotus petal-releasing domain had a horrifying side, even for someone of his level. His previous attack speed was monstrous, but it had to pass through Kia's domain. Just by passing through, he felt the instant disappearance of 1% of the spiritual energy in his body. To some cultivator of a rather low level, percent may not seem significant, but to a powerhouse with close to 300,000 spiritual energy, 1% was a loss of 3,000 spiritual energy. And he had only passed through it for 1 instant. If he were to fight her in her domain for a long time, wouldn't his spiritual energy just get totally wiped dry? Furthermore, this purified spiritual energy was very possibly transferred to Kia. What a terrifying domain of purification. Right because of these discoveries, Shui Jisheng temporarily remained passive. His attacks were unable to land on Kia, and he would get purified by her domain. What could he do in such a battle? Furthermore, her offensive strength was really domineering. Shui Jisheng had his hands tied for another reason, being that there's no way he could really harm Kia. After all, Kia was the future hope of the Assassin Temple. Even if his thirst for authority were to be even greater, he was after all a member of the Assassin Temple as well. That is why his techniques of assassination could in no way be used in this exchange with Kia. Feeling Shui Jisheng's silence, Kia made a move, revealing an indifferent smile. The sickle of the god of death was lightly waved in front of her, and immediately the petals on her domain curled up around its blade. At a lift of her right hand, it turned into airflows on the tip of her blade, shooting at the 12 spaces domain's gates. This attack of hers immediately caused the 12 gates to twist violently, turning a large amount of spatial spiritual energy into a barrier. This domain combining attack, defense and boost in one was really specialized for individual battles. He could proudly affirm that it ranked amongst the top compared to the overwhelming majority of other domains. But unfortunately, Shui Jisheng's current opponent was that Kia, whose domain of purification was a result of the evolution from the sickle of the god of death after purifying the slumbering calamity Elux, causing her understanding of purifying death energy to rise sharply. In some sense, that was the true power of the god of death, so how could the 12 spaces domain even compare? The white blade projection curling with silver light turned into nothingness, none of the 12 spatial gates having been destroyed, but Shui Jisheng found out with shock that he had lost another 100th of his spiritual energy. While maintaining one's domain, the user would have no way to absorb any external spatial essence for recovery, unless that domain had some absorptive properties. And the 12 spaces domain clearly didn't have such an ability. Kia lightly strode forward, and immediately, the domain of purification advanced alongside her. The 12 spaces domain followed with some distance to keep them under its encirclement. Visibly, Shui Jisheng was absolutely unwilling to see his own domain come into contact with the domain of purification. All this while, Shui Jisheng only had one winning strategy, to take advantage of the opponent's consumption. The full use of a domain would hugely use up one's spiritual energy. From his previous judgment, Kia's cultivation was below his by quite a gap, and since the domain of purification was quite a bit more powerful than his 12 spaces domain, it would undoubtedly use up far more spiritual energy. By letting this go on, Kia's domain would be the first to need to be removed by her own initiative. That way he would win without need for a fight. And what if Kia would want to clash with his domain using her own? Shui Jisheng was absolutely confident in his speed and ability to anticipate her actions. As for Kia's attacks, he only had to get out of their way. Shui Jisheng held an absolute confidence in that Kia's consumption would speed up while using her domain for attack. Although his consumption was large as well, his advantage in cultivation had to be accounted for as well. Kia naturally saw through Shui Jisheng's tactic, and the spectators from the Assassin Temple watching from above did so as well. Her being able to force the Elder Chief to such a position already gave them a complete approval of Kia deep inside. Without doubt, Kia was no weaker than Shing Yu in cultivation, and being so young, the Assassin Temple would surely soar through new heights under her lead. But was Kia's strength limited to that? No, of course not. Everything that just happened was, in her eyes, just the start of her show. The sickle of the god of death was slowly lifted, as Kia's eyes turned gradually white, and the surrounding domain of purification bubbled up intensely, surrounding her body and wrapping her all around, making her looks unidentifiable from whichever direction. If the previous domain of purification was like an immense white flowery alley, this domain of purification was like a flower bud formed of the overlapping of all those lotus petals, with Cai acting as its stamen. What is she planning? Including Shui Jisheng, everyone raised this question deep inside. The next instant, an ineffable sense of crisis appeared straight into Shui Jisheng's mind, as he mobilized his own 12 spaces domain. A gaudy silver light kept twirling, as the 12 gates abruptly changed stance, uniting as one while superposing each other. One could see that these superposed gates were surrounded by black twists, which was a sign of an imminent spatial breakthrough. Everyone familiar with Shui Jisheng knew that this elder chief was the most powerful when in this state. Through the superposition of the 12 spaces domain, he was able to actually teleport at a long distance of over 1,000 kilometers, as well as raise his attacks to a terrifying level. The sense of crisis made Shui Jisheng not dare show any more reservations. The white light of purification in front of his eyes suddenly weakened, as Cai reappeared in everyone's line of sight. The domain of purification had disappeared, but in Kia's left hand had appeared a sparkling and translucent entity, an extremely compact white lotus flower. Kia declared brightly, "Elder Shui, that's my domain's flourishing lotus flower. Want to try it out? However, my mastery of it is still insufficient. I can launch it but cannot stop it." "No need, I concede." Shui Jisheng's darkened voice resounded. The silver light vanishing, he stepped out, moving away from the 12 spaces domain, and directed an extremely complex look to Kia. The sickle of the god of death in her hand moved rhythmically, releasing a great amount of white threads which passed through the lotus in her left hand, as the petals came off, quietly dissipating, the whole process lasting close to half an hour. Shui Jisheng as well as the rest of the assassins stood in front of Kia and confronted her silently. The rhythmic movements of the sickle in her hand looked really artistic, giving them an even greater realization of the terror induced by that flourishing lotus flower. Domains wielded by powerhouses of the 9th step also had different grades. Anyone reaching the 2nd rank of the 9th step could wield a domain of his own, and the domain-wielding powerhouses of the 9th step could almost be called existences at a whole other level. Every individual would have a different domain, and its grade would determine future potential. The stronger the domain, the higher the future cultivating prospects would go, and that would also determine the feasibility of the domain itself evolving. The reason why Li Xingxi had convinced Shui Jisheng was right because of his understanding of his own domain having gone to the extent of producing a domain technique. But just now, Kia actually used her own domain technique. A domain technique could be called a product of the domain's evolution. And out of all domains, not even 1% could evolve and give rise to a domain technique. Maybe Kia's comprehension of this domain ability was not strong enough, but her having one was already plenty. In the Assassin Temple, there had already been no powerhouse that could comprehend a domain ability for over 1,000 years. It was not that Shui Jisheng feared Kia's domain ability, but that her use of a domain ability already conquered him thoroughly. Being the elder chief of the Assassin Temple, he had come to his own choice. Seeing the flourishing lotus flower finally dissipate in her hand, even Cai relaxed greatly. Just as she said, she still did not have a full control of this domain ability, and had not yet even tried out its true might, having at most used it to intimidate Shui Jisheng and no more. Seeing Kia retract her own domain, Shui Jisheng retrieved his dagger before crossing his arms, bowing in front of her. This was the formal salute in the Assassin Temple. No one other than the temple head Shing Yu should have qualifications to be saluted that way by him, but there would still be no need to bow. Right now, Shui Jisheng could really be said to have gone past the limits of his own etiquette habits, making clear his current attitude. Shing Yu had never been so lively for a lot of years already, especially since the steep decline of the Temple Alliance's population following the start of the Holy War. By chance, there was no damage sustained in the rear, which is what enabled the alliance to recover its vigor in just 4 years. But even if their economy and power was replenished, their population was still greatly affected, so the current Temple Alliance had to encourage pregnancy, as well as help improve the living conditions of the masses. Holy War, the largest city of the Temple Alliance, had its hotels packed since long ago, the reason being the decennial temple's great gathering. Although just a small count was really able to watch the Alliance's great stadium, a lot of people were willing to head to Holy City at this time because of the ardent atmosphere. Some seniors would even bring their children to Holy City to try out, seeking an opportunity to find a powerhouse for their children to acknowledge as master. The Dark Era was already some 6,000 years ago. The 2 years of Holy War having finally ended up in a demon retreat, gave a lot of insightful people a hope to see dawn come in this dark era. Almost all humans were hopeful to see the day that the human army would be the ones to lead the offense against demonkind. The temple's great gathering differed from the demon hunt selection in their degree of importance, and the people who were rushing to buy tickets for the very goal of watching clashes between the 6 great temples' powerhouses affirmed the confidence of the masses in the alliance. Almost every temple's great gathering caused great surges of emotions in the whole alliance, and drastically increased their amount of recruits in the following period. In Holy City, the most symbolic buildings had bright yellow announcements posted, recording in detail the times of the contests as well as rules for this temple's great gathering. Every temple's great gathering would involve such announcements, and amendments to the rules would immediately get published. Right, a white-cloaked youngster was standing in front of a 5-floored hotel, looking at it with attention. As early as 1 month ago, when the advertisements were first released, many of the ordinary people already got familiar with their content, which is why right now, he was only standing by himself in front of this announcement. The white cloak covered him entirely and gave off an eye-catching and lofty air. Even behind this cloak, this young man's very tall build was visible, as he really was close to 2 meters in size, with especially wide shoulders, though his build was not really excessively robust. His perfect build gave off a mystical feel as he stood calmly in place. He had a seemingly ordinary, yet extraordinary gentle, disposition. Most of the bypassers' gazes were attracted to this calm young man, causing them to feel peaceful and greatly relaxed just by looking at him. On that clear-cut announcement were recorded the time and rules for this temple's great gathering. Tomorrow would be the day of start of the temple's great gathering. When the time comes, the higher-ups from the 6 great temples would all gather into the Alliance's great stadium, each of the temples dispatching a team of 36 people to participate, making up a total of 216 contestants from the 6 great temples. The temple's great gathering was determined first of all by drawing ballots. In the first 3 days 1 versus 1 battles would be ongoing, a 3-day knockout competition. Each knockout battle would follow right after a previous one ends, with no time allocated for rest. Those from the priest temple won't be included in the individual knockout battles, they would be evaluated with another method in these individual stages, spiritual energy measuring. Generally, the priest temple's points would be around the middle ranks by the end of this stage. In this stage, a point would be awarded to every one of the other 5 temples' candidates for a victory, 2 points for 2 victories, with a doubled amount of points for every additional individual victory. Great restrictive clauses regulated this individual stage. First, no equipment or pill are to be allowed, and only the use of one's individual strength is allowed. Second, no situation of wounding the opponent allowed, and is penalized with a direct elimination. This temple's great gathering being no struggle of life and death, these 2 rules looked simple, but were greatly restrictive. Just think, when all contestants would at least be powerhouses of the 8th step, what is the level of control required to absolutely avoid wounding any opponent? The individual competition would terminate within 3 days, followed by sorting the points to conclude the primary stage of the temple's great gathering. The reason why this involved so many contestants was to assess the strength of every temple as a whole, as a single person's strength was not enough to stand for his or her whole temple. After the individual battles, would begin the contests for the highest spiritual energies. The 6 great temples would all dispatch 3 candidates of age below 100 years old to undergo spiritual energy assessment. Every year below 100 would give an additional 1,000 points of score. The addition of these 3 candidates' spiritual energies will make up their ranking, and the first place temple will be awarded with 200 points, the second would receive 150, third place 120, fourth place 90, fifth place 60, but none for the last one. After the end of the spiritual energy competition follows the domain competition, with each of the 6 great temples sending 3 contestants. Then a domain confrontation, with 18 domain-wielding powerhouses fighting together. Whichever side cannot maintain his domain anymore will be excluded until only 3 contestants from one temple are left. This one is really important, as the first place will be awarded 500 total points, with every next one being awarded 100 less, with the last one getting no reward. This kind of team competition does not emphasize on domain power, but should best implicate 3 complementary domains. That's because the winner won't necessarily be the side with the greatest powerhouse, but the side of the best coordination. In the previous gathering, the Knight Temple had managed to win with the combinations of the domains of the Knight Temple's Divine Knight of Defense and Planning Yang Haohan, the Divine Knight of Control and Constraint Long Qianying, and the Divine Knight of Adjudication and Trial Long Shing Yu, achieving victory in this most important stage, thus fundamentally settling the Knight Temple as number 1. The Temple's Great Gathering's last trial would be the most significant team battle. Each temple would send 10 contestants to undergo a round-robin tournament, with each victory awarding 100 total points. Among teams, the Priest Temple would not be participating, giving them a direct 300 total. All 4 stages would be confrontation between the top of the temple alliance's higher-ups. Generally, the least performing in the temple's Great Gathering would be the Priest Temple, but its importance still had no needs to be proved anymore. Anyway, a priest would visibly not be fitting as a ruler for the Temple Alliance. Aside from them, the others would all attach great importance to this ranking contest. The final ranking of the previous Temple's Great Gathering had the Knight Temple in first place, followed by the Mage Temple, Spiritual Temple, Assassin Temple, Priest Temple, and Warrior Temple. The Priest Temple, having been given some preferential treatment, ended up surpassing the Warrior Temple and gaining the 5th rank. The Warrior Temple would frequently be ranked among the last ones. This announcement was not at all correlated to any adjustment of the alliance, but the individuals with deeper understanding all knew that the final ranking would determine crucial changes in the alliance this year. So the contest for the first place would surely be even more intense than the previous years. The white-clad young man was standing there for half an hour already, looking like a statue which didn't move in the slightest from the beginning. What looked so good in a mere announcement? A distinct voice suddenly rang behind him, coming from a girl clad in a green gown. This girl was very beautiful, looking in her 20s, but gave off an aloof feel, and an impression of great pride making her unapproachable. Her green gown looked very simple and didn't give off any elemental fluctuation. As she appeared behind the young man clad in white, an indescribable faint green light bubbled up from her, pushing this white-clad youngster forward. This female mage was turned Wan, the sole disciple of the head of the Mage Temple, Li Jingxi. Over these 4 years, she kept training bitterly, and was fully directed by her master, making her one of the targets of the Mage Temple's resources, and causing her cultivation to have made great progress. Xian Yuan Yang, who had formerly been standing alongside her, had now fallen far behind. Her cultivation had already broken through the 8th step, and she had learnt some formidable original wind elemental spell from Li Jingxi, and was one of the Mage Temple's representative for this temple's Great Gathering. Given her age, that was absolutely an enormous honor for her. This video will end here.